Suddenly, the ship gave a sickening lurch and Poon Lim slammed into the side of a bunk. An ashtray and some other items tumbled after him. He wondered what was going on. The SS Ben Lomond, a British merchant ship, was 13 days out of Cape Town, South Africa, sailing west bound for Paramaribo, Dutch Guiana. It was nearly noon, and 24-year-old Lim, as the second steward, had just been about to leave his quarters to go serve lunch. Lim got to his feet. He was walking out the door when a massive explosion rocked the ship, hurling him to the deck. He lay there for a moment, the wind knocked out of him. He could hear the creaking of a boat, the yells of sailors, and the gush of seawater as it poured through a shattered porthole. Comprehension kicked in as the second explosion, even larger than the first, shook the ship. The Ben Lomond had been torpedoed by a German U-boat. Lim scrambled back to his quarters for his bright orange life jacket. The ship pitched and yawed as he put it on and stumbled down the galley. Thick black acrid smoke billowed from the vents. Lim fought his way across the deck to his assigned lifeboat station, but the boat was already gone. All around him, panicked sailors ran every which way. Scalding steam hissed out of the damaged engine room, and he could hear the screams of the trapped firemen. A slick of black oil was spreading across the blue ocean. No doubt about it, the SS Ben Lomond was going down. Lim saw the second mate and some seamen at the bridge station trying to lower a lifeboat. He ran over to help. There was a sudden thunder-like boom. The main bulkhead was collapsing. The second mate yelled at him to tie their life jackets tight and go over the side. The seaman quickly jumped, but Lim froze. He wasn't much of a swimmer, having only learned to dog paddle as a child. The second mate screamed at him to jump or he would be sucked down with the ship. Before Lim could move, the stern plunged and the massive wave of seawater poured onto the ship. Lim was caught in a black whirlpool. The water made his ears pop, ripped off his slippers, and tangled his loose Chinese trousers around his legs. He struggled trying to kick himself free. His lungs ached and his head threatened to explode. Just when he couldn't hold his breath any longer, Lim was suddenly propelled upwards, the buoyancy of his life jacket making him pop on the surface like a cork. Coughing, Lim stared at the scene before him. He couldn't believe it. All that was left of the Ben Lomond was a huge oily stain and a field of floating wreckage. Lim could hear yells from the living, but the glare of the sun on oily water made it difficult to tell which direction they were coming from. Surely someone had made it onto a lifeboat. Lim shouted too, first in Chinese and then in English. Hanging on a broken board, Lim paddled through the debris field. About 100 yards away, he spotted some seamen in a raft pulling another survivor aboard. Lim shouted and tried to swim closer to the raft, but the men didn't respond. A periscope suddenly appeared and Lim was rocked by swells as a U-boat rose to the surface. A hatch opened and submariners swarmed out. They trained guns on the raft and reeled it in. Lim breathlessly watched as the survivors were led into the submarine. Sometimes U-boats would take survivors hostage, but these submariners seemed relaxed. They hung out on deck smoking cigarettes. Lim decided to take a chance and started yelling for help as he paddled toward the submarine. Eventually, the seamen noticed Lim and alerted the others. They beckoned him to come closer. Then, Lim saw survivors being forced back onto the raft. The U-boat started up, churning water, creating huge swells, which tumbled Lim under. The submariners laughed and aimed their guns, pretending to fire at him. Then they went down the hatch and the U-boat began to dive. Lim closed his eyes, thinking that he was going to be sucked down in another whirlpool, but he wasn't. After a few moments, he opened his eyes to see that the submarine and the raft were gone. The SS Ben Lomond had sunk in 2 minutes. Only 6 survivors had managed to abandon the ship. The survivors on the raft were never seen again, ultimately making Lim the lone survivor out of the crew of 54. Despairing, Lim paddled around looking for someone, something, anything. Hours later, he finally saw something. One of the Ben Lomond's emergency rafts. After swimming to the raft and hauling himself onto the narrow deck, Lim was exhausted and collapsed. Sometime later, he awoke, stiff, sore, and shivering. Lim wrestled out of his life jacket and took off his sodden clothing. Worried about getting separated from the raft, he took some rope and made a loop for his wrist so he could keep the raft tied to him. He curled up on a ledge and scanned the darkening horizon, hoping to see the sweep of a spotlight, but there was only waves. It was late morning when Lim awoke, chilly. He reached for his clothing only to realize that it was gone, fallen overboard sometime during the night. However, his life jacket was floating in the water. The buckle snagged on the edge of the raft. He leaned over and grabbed at it, but it was just out of reach. Lim was afraid to stretch further for fear he'd fall overboard. A wave suddenly swept it free and he watched helplessly as the bright orange life jacket drifted away until it was finally out of sight. Lim took stock of the raft. It was square with 2 8-foot-long, 2.5-foot-wide plank benches. A 3x6 well sat between them. The whole frame sat upon 6 watertight drums. There were 2 metal containers fore and aft containing supplies. Luckily, the containers were stocked with a bag of barley sugar, 2 pounds of chocolate, 5 tins of evaporated milk, tins of hardtack, dried beef, flour, molasses, suet, malted milk tablets, and a bottle of lime juice. More importantly, there was an 11-gallon water tank. There was also loose tobacco and rolling papers in a small tin, matches along with a rope, 5 flares, 2 smoke pots, and a flashlight. Lastly, there were oars and a huge canvas sail. Unfortunately for Lim, he knew little about sailing and had no way to navigate. He quickly used the sail to create a shelter so he'd have some relief from the scorching sun. The next several days were all the same. During the day, Lim huddled in the shaded well. Night brought relief from the heat, but then he would shake with chills due to sunburn. Though Lim didn't have much of an appetite, he ground up a little hardtack, mixed it with water to form a thick soup, and sprinkled on some dry beef for flavor. He daydreamed about his childhood in a rural village in the province of Hainan, China. He tried to calculate how long it would take a rescue boat to reach the area where the Ben Lomond went down to find him. A squall blew up and the raft danced on the choppy waves. Lim curled up in the well and gripped the side of a bench so hard he got splinters. Just over a week after the Ben Lomond sank, Lim sighted a ship. It was still far away, so he decided to set off a smoke pot to draw it near, and then he would set off a flare. The ship didn't react to the smoke and changed course. But Lim decided to set off a flare anyway, but he didn't know how to use them. They had instructions, but Lim didn't read English very well. He tried to light a flare and tossed it in a wide arc. It fell into the sea and sank unlit. In a panic, he dropped the second flare in the sea. But his third attempt worked. A red ball of light shot up into the sky, but the ship didn't change course. Lim set off the fourth flare and the ship swung toward his raft. Lim set off his final flare. The ship came close enough that he could see 3 men on the bridge and the glint of binoculars. Lim realized the mariners were studying him. Sometimes enemy subs used decoys to lure ships. Lim yelled that he was from the Ben Lomond. He thought about jumping in the water and swimming for it. Suddenly, the ship's engines revved to life. Lim lit a smoke pot, but the ship turned and rapidly sailed out of sight. Lim cursed and wept. He wondered if the ship had refused to pick him up because he was Chinese. The next morning, Lim woke up with a new resolve. There was no guarantee he'd be rescued anytime soon. He needed to make plans to survive. He checked his supplies. He had drank 2 gallons of water in just over a week. At this rate, his water would last maybe 28 days. However, if he limited himself to a pint a day, drinking in the morning and then again at dusk, he could stretch it to 40 days. He portioned out his food as well. Lim's skin was erupting into painful boils from the constant exposure to salt water. He took the jagged edge of a tin and lanced the bumps. He could no longer sleep in the well. He needed to stay dry and sleep on a bench, even if he risked falling into the sea. He made himself a rough sleeping bag out of some canvas and lashed it to a bench. It took several days before Lim got used to napping on the bench, but with his skin staying drier, his boils improved. His biggest problem became thirst. Most days, long before evening, he had drunk all his rationed water. He opened a tin of milk and drank most of it at once because it would rapidly spoil in the heat. It gave him an upset stomach and diarrhea. Lim figured out that he could keep an open tin of milk floating in another tin of seawater in the well to slow the spoiling. When it rained, Lim scrubbed himself and gargled. He developed a system to catch rainwater on the sail so he could replenish the water tank. By now, his skin had tanned to leather and his hair had grown long enough to shield his eyes from the dazzling sun. As his supplies got low, Lim began to try to figure out how to catch fish. He ended up digging the spring out of the flashlight and bending it into a hook. He beat the edge of a tin lid and shaped it to make a knife. The knife went on a lanyard around his neck. After many tries, Lim finally caught his first fish. He ate it raw, even though it was slimy and disgusting. Knowing that fish was his best chance for survival, Lim came up with a system of drying them, thus making them more tasty and preserving them to eat later. Lim had been successfully fishing for about 2 weeks when a large fish nearly got away with his hook. Lim decided to make a better hook. Using the heavy key to the water tank, Lim started to dig a nail out of one of the planks. For hours he worked at it using the key and his fingernails to chip away at the wood surrounding the nail. Unable to yank the loosened nail out with his hands, eventually he gripped it in his teeth and pulled. The pain was excruciating and Lim's mouth rapidly filled with blood. But all at once the nail yanked free. Lim's head snapped back and he bumped it hard on the bench. Lim had to wait a few days for his hands to heal up before hammering the nail into a hook shape and then filing it into a fine point. In all, the making of the new hook took about a week in which he barely ate, but afterwards he was able to catch larger fish. Lim developed a routine where he fished early in the morning, cleaned the fish and prepared them for drying, ate and spent the rest of the afternoon in the shade of the canvas. Sometimes he sang songs from his childhood as he worked. He was able to preserve and store up a few days' worth of fish. At first, Lim counted the days by tying knots in a rope, but after a long while he decided that there was no point in counting the days and began counting full moons. It was several days later that Lim spotted 6 planes flying in formation. He had seen planes before, but this time he was ready. He waved the crude flag he had made with a length of canvas and an oar. A plane broke formation to take a closer look. Lim yelled and waved the oar madly. The plane circled the raft. Lim had been seen. The plane dropped a buoy and waggled its wings before flying off. Lim sat with hope and caution warring inside him. How long before the plane came back? As afternoon turned into evening, Lim became worried. Low dark clouds hung in the sky. A big storm was coming. Soon the wind howled, angry streaks of lightning split the sky, surging waves rushed over the raft, sending Lim sputtering. All he could do was wrap himself in the canvas sail, huddle in the well, and hold onto a plank as best he could. Lim wasn't exactly sure for how long the storm raged, but it was for days. When the sea finally quieted, he crawled out of the well, weak and bruised. Worst yet, the storm had destroyed his supplies. His food was spoiled or washed away, the water tank befouled with seawater. By strength of will, Lim bailed out the water tank, spread the canvas to dry, and completed other cleanup tasks. For a couple days, Lim tried to fish, baiting the hook with barnacle meat, but caught nothing. His genitals began to swell, and it was hard to pee. When Lim finally urinated, he drank the pee. Unfortunately, it only eased his thirst briefly. Lim would repeat the action a few times over the next week, his urine growing darker and darker. Then one day, he couldn't go anymore. He was so thirsty. His skin was flaking off. The saltwater boils were back, and they broke open on their own and oozed pus. The inside of his mouth was full of ulcers, and foul white fur coated his tongue. Lying down was uncomfortable, as he could feel every inch of his protruding bones touching the planks. He was dying. There was no way around it. Lim drifted in and out of consciousness, pinching himself to stay awake. He felt that if he slept, he wouldn't wake up. Day turned into night. A gentle breeze blew over his feverish skin. Lim kept his eyes half closed against the searing brightness of the moon. He heard the flap of wings overhead. Then a bird landed on the raft to investigate him. Lim held his breath as the bird hopped closer, closer. When it was less than a foot from his hand, Lim pounced. He had it by the legs. The bird shrieked and beat its wings, but Lim banged its head against the deck until it was silent. With his knife, Lim sawed a slit in the feathered breast and drank the still warm blood. Then he tore apart the bird and ate it raw. For the first time in a few days, he slept. The next day, it drizzled and Lim was able to catch a little water. That night, Lim caught another bird and devoured it like the first. He awoke to rain. Lim drank deeply. It was too much water too soon, and he vomited. After that, he took smaller sips and was fine. He set up his water catch system and was able to capture several gallons of water. Not long after that, Lim realized that he had drifted into waters full of fish. He was able to catch some. He had to force himself to eat slowly. Over the next several days, Lim grew stronger. He alternated between catching fish and birds. His health slowly improved. One day while fishing, Lim reeled in part of a tree trunk. It was the first sign of land he'd seen in months. Within a few days, the ocean water had turned muddy brown. It obviously mingled with fresh water somewhere nearby. In the distance, Lim could see a strip of sandy beach. As Lim drifted closer, he could see a jungle and smell the vegetation. He tried to use an oar to row towards the land, but the current was too strong, so he drifted parallel. One misty morning, Lim could hardly believe his eyes. A fleet of fishing boats were sailing fairly close by in search of an early catch. Lim began to shout for help in English, his voice rusty from disuse. Poon Lim was rescued by a fishing family 10 miles off the coast of Brazil. He sailed with them for 3 days before they landed at Belém. He spent 133 days at sea. He was weak but able to walk ashore unassisted. The amazed British consul took photos of Lim and sent him to a hospital. He was 30 pounds underweight, but surprisingly he had no serious problems. He spent 45 days in the hospital recovering. Eventually, Lim returned to Britain. King George VI bestowed a British Empire medal on him, and the Royal Navy incorporated his tale into manuals of survival techniques. After World War II ended, Lim wanted to emigrate to the United States, but the quota for Chinese immigrants had been reached. However, because of his fame and special legislation written by Senator Warren Magnuson, he received a special dispensation and eventually gained citizenship. The U.S. Navy Emergency Rescue Equipment section interviewed Lim extensively, even reconstructing a raft similar to the one Lim survived on. Lim reenacted his survival skills and showed them his technique for making a knife. When told no one had ever survived on a raft longer at sea, Lim is said to have replied, "I hope no one will ever have to break the record." What happened to those who survived the sinking of the Titanic but didn't make it onto a lifeboat? Find out here. An SAS soldier got lost in the Iraqi desert and goes to amazing lengths to survive, even drinking nuclear waste. Check out his story.